Hello and welcome. My name is Minneapolis, they, he, she, and today we're looking at and talking about What Remains, Personal and Political Histories of Colombia by Camilo Aguirre, published by Uncivilized Books in 2022. Content notes for a military dictatorship and all the horrible things that obviously involves. A book that almost no one has read. It was also kind of hard to track down author information. But according to his entry in the 2020 NCBA Prize, quote, Camilo Aguirre is a Colombian artist whose practice shifts between comics and fine arts. In his comics, Camilo uses the elements of documentary format to tell non-fictional stories, implementing anecdotes and interviews from his immediate context, addressing the asking how his own subjectivity is constructed from the Colombian context, and reflecting on this context towards the ideas of globalization and belonging. Camilo has been the author of graphic novels such as Ciervos de Bronx, Bronze Deers, 2014, Caldas Aslada, Isolated Warmth, 2012, and has been co-author of graphic novels such as Caminos Condenados, Condemned Paths, 2016, and La Palazzo, 2018. During his career in comics, Camilo has been able to implement social research while working with communities in Colombia in projects that involve addressing dispossession, violent conflict, historic memory, and symbolic reparation. In the fine arts field, Camilo approaches drawing as a series of strategies more than a medium, including the association of ideas and the relationship between material, formalization and context as drawing tools. In his long-term project, Ciervos de Bronx, 2011, Camilo has developed a personal archive of letters, photography, interviews, paintings, comics, animations, and photocopies documenting his father's participation in the union activism during the 90s and addressing the state violence persecution towards union activities in Colombia. In his project In Blood, 2014-2016, Camilo addresses the political implications of his family history by highlighting chapters of Colombia's history through his great-grandmother, Tony y la Hacienda, 2014, and inserting his great-granduncle's reimagined history in Colombia's Independence Museum. Casa de Florero, Radical, 2016. End quote. What kinds of keywords came to mind reading What Remains? Autobiography, journalism, social history, community, war and peace, resistance, and the military. Taking the description from my library, because Goodreads can't be bothered apparently, quote, What Remains is an innovative graphic novel that weaves documentary and memoir forms to capture the sociopolitical fabric of Colombia, spanning 200 years. Camilo Aguirre dips in and out of pivotal historical periods, all while skillfully interweaving family histories and anecdotes of students, union workers, and guerrilla fighters. He creates a critical, unflinching vision of Colombia that is profoundly mobilizing in its search for resolution. Aguirre is hopeful throughout, but he refuses to step into the trap of fictitious optimism. The people and the families represent a detailed composite portrait of life in Colombia, sketched from opposing ends of the political spectrum. Colombia is inextricable from its people's complex lives and identities, as well as the lives of Aguirre and his family. Aguirre narrates the complexity from a distant Minneapolis. He details the tides of power in politics, from American and corporate interventions to internal hierarchies of wealth and power, and finally to the impact of emerging globalization and neoliberalism. The criminalization and persecution of union workers and students propagate amidst these political phases. What Remains poses a question. Aguirre answers through a profoundly personal lens and demonstrates that what remains of Colombia are the rich and varied lives of its people. An interesting read. The start was my least favorite part, a series of short vignettes. It wasn't until we had jumped back and forth between the personal and the national a couple of times before I felt like I had a handle on what was going on. Visually, I thought What Remains was very strong and engaging. As someone who is not terribly knowledgeable about Colombia, both historically and presently, I can't really comment at all on Aguirre's perspective. That said, this book does obviously fall on the not afraid to be personal side of things, which I do appreciate. We get a pretty clear idea of who Aguirre is as a person, and there's no false notion of neutral objectivity going on. Aguirre also goes out of his way to pull in other people's stories as well, so it was far from one note. Perhaps most interested in the economic and party politics of Colombia. We get a sprinkling of gender diversity, and Aguirre tells a story about his brief time as a street artist when a trans sex worker probably saved his ass from paramilitary forces. An iota of representation, but more than I expected. And this is the risk I run into when I don't write these reviews immediately after reading, but I don't recall any discussion of ability/disability, which is the status quo. But at the same time, violent conflict is an intrinsically disabling event, so it would certainly not have been difficult to touch on it in some way, you would think. Concluding thoughts. I hope more people pick up this book and tell me what they think about it. Would rate 4 out of 5 stars. Bye all, keep reading and organize to end capitalist oppression. And as always, Literally Graphic is created on land that should be given back to the traditional landholders, which in this case is, to my knowledge, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe people, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat Nation.